This week's parsha talks about the rebellion of Korach against the authority of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Mishna in Pirkei Avos contrasts this controversy to the controversies of Hillel and Shammai, great sages who disputed points of Jewish law. And the Mishnah says the following: Kol machlokas shi l'shem shamayim, any controversy which is for the sake of heaven, so far lehiskayim, ultimately it will be sustained, not resolved, sustained. L'chol machlokas she'ein l'shem shamayim, and any dispute and controversy which is not for the sake of heaven, ein sefer lehiskayim, it will not be sustained. So the Mishnah continues, what is an example of a machlokas, which is l'shem shamayim, a controversy which is for the sake of heaven? This is the controversy of Hillel and Shammai. Hillel and Shammai were two great sages. Hillel was the Nasi, he was the chief judge of the Sanhedrin in this time. Shammai was his right-hand man. He was the Av Bezin, he was the assistant. And these two seem to have had several disagreements. Not many. Hillel and Shammai themselves, according to the Mishnah, argued on 4 points of Jewish law. 4 points. Their disciples established academies. The academy of Hillel's followers was called Beis Hillel. The academy of Shammai's followers was called Beis Shammai. And the Talmud records about 250 disputes between the houses of Hillel and the house of Shammai. But Hillel and Shammai themselves pretty much agreed on most things, but there were 4 points of Jewish law in which they argued. So their machlokas, their controversy is called the controversy of the Shem Shamayim, and it is so far lehiskayim, it is sustained. What does that mean, it's sustained? We'll see in a few moments. What's the example of the controversy which is not l'shem shamayim? This is the machlokas of Korach v'Adoso. This is the controversy of Korach and his entourage arguing with Moshe Rabbeinu, and that dispute is not sustained. Let's understand exactly what this means. What is the real difference between a machlokas l'shem shamayim and a machlokas not l'shem shamayim? Because normally, when we talk about mitzvahs, we understand that ideally a mitzvah should be done l'shma. It should be done for a pure motive. If it's done not l'shem shamayim, not for the sake of heaven, if it's done for some ulterior motive, it's blemished, it's damaged. But in the case of machlokas, there may be something deeper here. Let me share with you 2 Gemaras that may illustrate the point. There's a Gemara Masechus Kedushin which says the following: that Ho'av u'bino, if you have a father and son who are studying Torah, or a Rav v'Talmida, or a master and his disciple who are studying Torah, so as they are discussing the issue at hand, nasu soinim ze lo ze, they become enemies of one another. If they really are studying as Torah is meant to be studied, they will be filled with hatred for one another. They will despise one another. They'll call each other names. But ultimately, ein zaz misham, they don't move from the spot until they become lovers. And the Gemara brings a pasuk. It's really a pasuk in next week's parsha. It's within context. It's a reference to a great miracle that happened to the Jewish people as they were passing through the land of Moab. It says, Al Kain Ye'amar b'Sefer Milchamos Hashem. Because of that victory, it is recorded in the book of the wars of the Lord. Es Vahev B'Sufa. And those words, Es Vahev Besufa, really are references to place names, places where different aspects of the miracle took place. But Chazal take this verse and they interpret it homiletically and they say the following, that there is a book called the Book of the Wars of God. The Book of the Wars of God is a book in which a chapter is written whenever two people study Torah together. Whenever two people study Torah together, I don't mean listening to a class, I mean they really are studying. So they are engaged in battle. That is Sefer Milchamos Hashem, the book of the wars of the Lord. But it says, Es Vahev Besufa. Vahev, phonetically, is related to the word Ahav, or love. And Besufa is phonetically related to the word Besofa, which means in the end. So despite the fact that they are really locked in battle, but ultimately they end up as lovers. That's what the Gemara says. Now, what does that mean? Does it simply mean that they apologize to each other for calling each other names? So that's all it means? Nowadays we are more gentle, but my father-in-law told me that in Europe, when he was in yeshiva, and the boys were studying chavrusas and partners, they'd get angry at each other, they'd call each other names. Du fared. That was a common epithet. You horse. Mr. Fared. Mr. Pyre. A pyre was like a lowly peasant. They call each other names. So perhaps by the end of the session they would make up and apologize. Oh, sorry for calling you a fair. You're not so much of a fair. It's really much deeper than that. The idea is as follows, that you only arrive at emes, you only arrive at truth through the pathway of division. In other words, where two people are in constant agreement, you don't have the tension which leads to greater clarity in learning. It's if I stake out one position and you stake out the opposite position, and we each vigorously argue our positions, from that, a higher truth can emerge. And the Gemara tells the story that Rabbi Yochanan, the great sage Rabbi Yochanan, had a study partner, Reish Lakish. And the Gemara tells the entire story. Reish Lakish originally was not a rabbi, he was a bandit, and he became a Baal Tshuva, and he became such a scholar, he became Rabbi Yochanan's study partner. And that's why in the Talmud you find the two of them are virtually inseparable. Anyway, Reish Lakish died, and Rabbi Yochanan was very, very distraught. Very, very distraught. He was very upset. His chavrusa, his partner, was gone. So the rabbis decided to match him up with another partner. So they gave him Rabbi Elazar, became the study partner. And every time Rabbi Yochanan made a statement, Rabbi Elazar brought 24 proofs. Pretty good. So Rabbi Yochanan was even more distraught. He said that when I learned with Reish Lakish, every time I made a statement, he brought 24 refutations. And from his challenge, clarity emerged. So what good are you? All you're doing is confirming what I held all along. Doesn't accomplish anything. As Hegel would put it, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. In other words, all progress is really a consequence of a dialectic, a debate, a conversation, where one side takes one position, the other side takes a different position, they duke it out, and from that, there is progress. From that, the truth emerges. The more vigorous the debate, then the greater likelihood that there'll be a genuine advancement of knowledge. was if the two people just go through the motions of disagreement. And one says, I think this. And the other one says, no, I think that. Oh, how interesting. Well, I still believe this. I believe that. Oh, very good. We can agree to disagree. That type of power of machlokas doesn't lead anywhere. Now, it has to be really like a fight for blood. That's the type of fight that each side really challenges the other, and from that there's a resolution. The idea of nasum ohavim zelazeh, that in the end they become lovers, means that it's only through the process of machlokas that now they've created something of which they are the joint owners. The truth that emerges from the machlokas was created by the two sides of the machlokas. And therefore, they have a joint enterprise, and in that, they are lovers. They've made something together. So in the same way that, for example, you may have a father and a mother who become closer with the birth of their child, because now they have something in which they've both invested. So the two chavrusas, who were previously fighting each other with cats and dogs, but now from their machlokas a truth has emerged. They are both invested in that truth, and therefore they are ayavim. They are lovers now, because there is something which they created jointly together. That's if the machlokas is l'shem shemayim, and that's what it means. So far, l'hiskayim, it's sustained, not that it's resolved. Resolution would mean they kiss and make up. It's not that. There is something real which exists and is sustained as a consequence of the machlokas, which would not be here if the machlokas had not taken place. You know, in our own lifetime, there's an amazing phenomenon that you may be aware of, may not be aware of the tremendous synthesis of the Hasidic and non-Hasidic worlds. It's an amazing, amazing thing. Once upon a time, the Hasidim and their so-called Misnagdim really were fighting, and bitterly. Sometimes the tactics were underhanded, and that seems to have ended. And some people lament this. They say that the good old days when there was really a machlokas going on, each side stood for something. Nowadays, the positions have become meaningless. I'm fond of repeating over the mashal, the parable. There once said that once there were two brothers who were very, very, very wealthy, and they both ate gourmet meals, but they never could eat together, because one always ate meat foods, fleischiks, and the other always ate dairy foods, milchiks, so they couldn't eat at the same table. They can't eat meat and milk together. And he described the roast and the pheasant and the steaks that the one had, and the cheesecake and the blintzes and the quiche that the other had, but they couldn't eat together. Anyway, after a while, they had business problems, and they lost their money, and they both were reduced to borscht and potatoes. And they still never ate together. So one day, one of the brothers said to the other brother, says, when I used to eat steak and you used to eat cheesecake, I understand we couldn't eat together, but now we're both borscht and potatoes, we can eat at the same table. So Footnote said that once upon a time the Hasidim stood for something, once upon a time the Misnagdim stood for something, but now it's all borscht and potatoes. That's how we put it. But I don't look at it that way. Because I think that it's not simply that both sides lost their energy. What really happened is that there's been a synthesis. They were once fighting about something very, very vigorously. But what emerged from that is a type of synthesis. No, not a single synthesis. There are still differences between the various groups. But what the Hasidim stood for which is joyous service of God. And what the Misnagdim stood for, which is deep intellectual analysis, really is shared by virtually every Jewish community. So if you go to the Hasidim, they're also studying Talmud in a very, very deep way. If you go to the Misnagdim, you'll see that their philosophical thought really is all borrowed from Hasidus, and even song and celebration has become part of their lives. And interestingly, even more than that, the entire role that a Rebbe plays in Hasidus really has been embraced by the non-Hasidic world. I don't think that the average so-called Lithuanian yeshiva student is missing a Rebbe. He just looks to his Rosh Yeshiva to fill the same role. So we're really dealing with a situation where there's been a synthesis of the two opposing sides, and that synthesis emerged from the clarification of the two opposing viewpoints, which came through the machlokas. So it's so poliskayim. It isn't just that it's resolved. It isn't just that everyone apologized and made up. There's something which is sustained, and it continues. It's perpetuated. It's the fruit. It's that which the machlokas gave birth to. That's if the machlokas is l'shem shamayim. What if the machlokas is not l'shem shamayim? So what is a machlokas not l'shem shamayim? If you're not fighting for an ideal, what are you fighting for? You're really fighting for yourself. That's really the idea of a machlokas not l'shem shamayim. Because you're not advancing your ideals, you're advancing yourself. And again, I'm always reluctant to mix politics into class. For a person who's reluctant, I certainly do it often enough. But without naming any names, right? We all know that there are politicians that run on a certain set of premises, and they get into office, they do the exact opposite. So how do you explain that phenomenon? I mean, if they're going to get into office and do the exact opposite, so why did they run for office in the first place? Now you might say, well, once you get into office, you see things from a different perspective. And there's certainly an element of truth to that. Sometimes circumstances compel a change of strategy. There's also something else, which is that many people running for office are not running to advance ideals. They're running to advance themselves, running to advance their own careers. So at this stage of the campaign, it's advantageous to promote these ideas. At this stage, it's advantageous to promote those ideas. Now, for example, in the United States, which I'm very familiar with, in an election campaign, a presidential election campaign, there are two stages. There's winning the nomination of your party, and then winning the general election. Now, in the primaries, which is the process by which a nominee is selected by a party, who votes in the primaries? Only the true believers, okay? And therefore there's a general consensus among political scientists that in the initial stage, until the convention, until the candidates are selected, you really want to appeal to the true believers within your party. So a Republican who's running to be nominated will take a very, very right-wing position to win the votes of the faithful of his party. And a Democrat will appeal to the left-wingers, because those are the people that are the true believers who come out in primary campaigns. But once the nomination has been won, so then there's a change. Because who votes in the general election? Not only the true believers at the fringe. It's really
the man in the street.
The man in the street, the man in the middle.
Yeah.
And the truth is that it's the man in the middle who really casts the deciding vote. Because if you're a left-winger, you're going to vote for the Democrat no matter what. And if you're a right-winger, you'll probably vote for the Republican no matter what. So who's really on the borderline? The people in the middle. So all of a sudden the strategy changes. And each of the candidates who won his office by taking an extreme position now is trying to promote himself as being moderate. He is towing the line of the golden mean. And you might say, is it hypocritical? Is it contradictory? It's really relevant. Because the people who run for office, right, are running to advance themselves, not necessarily to advance ideals. And therefore they'll say what they need to say to win elections, to win votes. And what really is pathetic is how fast the changes take place. How fast the changes take place. It's not like over years. We're talking about virtually overnight. Okay, having said that, so this is the machlokus which is not l'shem shamayim. The machlokus which is not l'shem shamayim is where the party to the machlokus is really advancing not an ideal, but is advancing himself. Well, since he's advancing himself, there's no one to be sustained. Once the machlokus ends and the Baal machlokus, the master of the machlokus, is eliminated, there's no ideal. I want to show you something which I think is very, very, very interesting. What is really the machlokus over here? We're going to see a few interesting things about this machlokus, but one thing seems obvious. The question is, who should the Kohen Gadol be? Who should the Kohen Gadol be? So Aaron has the job, and Korach and his men, and there are 250 of them, believe that they're equally qualified. So they should get the job. So Moshe proposes a test. What is the test? That all 251 contestants should do the exact same thing. Take a fire pan, offer incense, and then God will select whoever he wants to be the high priest. In fact, that's what happened. They all bring their identical fire pans, they offer incense, and the 250 are burned to death, and Aaron survives. So Aaron is chosen to be the Kohen Gadol. It's a very interesting thing when you think about it for a second. If I was writing the story, so if I was making up the story, I would have said like this: you have 251 people who are vying for the same job. Well, each one probably has a different idea as to how it should be done. I mean, each person has an opinion, each person has an idea, each person has a way. So I would have said, let each person do the type of avoda that he thinks is appropriate. And then God will select whoever he selects on that basis. So maybe this person thinks the Ketorah should be made this way, and that person thinks the Ketorah should be made that way. And maybe this person thinks the Ketorah should be brought in this type of vessel, and this person thinks the Ketorah should be brought in this type of vessel. And maybe this person thinks that the Ketorah should be brought in this place, and that person thinks it should be brought in that place. So let each person do it his way, and then God will choose what he prefers. Because what is this idea of everyone doing the exact same thing? That's what Moshe is pointing out, that it's obvious in this machlokes there's nothing to do with ideas. There's nothing to do with how the avodah should be done, what's the best way to serve God. It's only a question of who should have the position. So therefore, let's call a spade a spade. Everyone should do the exact same thing, and then God will pick whoever he wants. But let's not fool ourselves into thinking that we're discussing deep ideological issues over here. It's only a question of who gets the job. But whoever gets the job is going to do the exact same thing. It's not going to be any different. The only difference will be that instead of being you who's doing it, it'll be me who's doing it. But it's not going to be any better, it's not going to be any different. So this is the test. Let everyone do the exact same thing, and God will pick whoever he wants. And of course God picked Aaron and not the 250. But that really is, I think, such a vivid depiction of the issue. That we're not talking about anything ideological or any different approach. It's just a question of who's going to fill the office. And therefore all 251 should do the exact same thing. And then God will select on that basis. There's also another very, very interesting thing. There's a Mishna in Pirkei Avos, famous Mishna, which says that there are 3 fatal flaws. I don't call them sins, but 3 fatal flaws. It says, Hakina v'ataiva v'hakavod motziin es adam min ha'olam. Jealousy and lust and the desire for honor remove a person from this world. And if you have one of these 3 flaws, you're in big trouble. Lust, if you desire physical gratification excessively, that can have terrible consequences. If a person seeks honor, that can have terrible consequences. If a person is a jealous person, an envious person, kina, that can remove a person from this world. And it seems from the Mishnah these are 3 separate things. The Mishnah says, Shlosh Devar, there are 3 things that remove a person from this world. Kina, Taiva, and Kavod. Now, at first we have to start to understand, why should kina be counted under a separate heading? And if I'm jealous of you, what am I jealous of? I'm jealous of what you have that I don't have. So, for example, if you have an ice cream cone and I don't, I'm jealous of you. Well, that's Taiva. That's desire, that's lust. Is there a real difference as to whether I desire the ice cream cone not having seen you have one, or I desire the ice cream cone because I see you have one? It seems to be the same desire. So what is unique about kin, about jealousy? Because you have it. See in a second. Or covet, honor, the same thing. Because I want to have honor. So if I see you have the honor, what am I jealous of? I'm jealous of the honor that you're getting that I want. So why is kina a different category? The truth is, it is a different category for a very simple reason. You see, if I am plagued with taiva, what I want is the ice cream. I want the meat. I want that thing. If I seek kavod, that's what I want. I want that good feeling. It feels good when you get up in an audience, everyone applauds. It feels good. It feels heartwarming. Kavod, people stand up and you walk into a room. So I might want that. The Baal Kina, it's not that he really wants what the other person has. What irks the Baal Kina is that someone should be higher up on the totem pole than he. And what it is you have is irrelevant. Whether what you have more than me is object of desire, or whether it's honor that you have, or whatever it is, it's really irrelevant. The point is that you have something which I don't have. What's the acid test? The acid test is if you'd be given the choice of getting it, but your opponent will also get it. Will that be good enough? Let's say, for example, I see my friend has ice cream. And God says, listen, I'll give you ice cream too, but he'll also have the ice cream. Will that be good enough? Well, if you're motivated by taiva, if you're motivated by desire, there's no thing. What do I care? As long as I have ice cream, I'm happy you should have ice cream too. If I'm motivated by kavod, then what do I care that he should also have kavod? Right? As long as I have kavod, he can have kavod too. But if I'm motivated by kina, which is the desire to be number one, then it bothers me to no end that someone else should be my equal. It's not only he can't be my superior, even my equal will bother me. And therefore it has to be that if I'm not the only one to have it, no one should have it. It reminds me of the joke. They tell the story, there were once 2 competitors. They had stores on opposite sides of the street. And they were very jealous of each other. When a customer would go into the one store, the other one would really be very upset. And finally, God came to one of the competitors and said, listen, you should know, I'm ready to give you whatever you want. But I'm telling you now, whatever you ask for, I'm going to give your neighbor double. So what do you want? So he's thinking. He says, blind me in one eye. You know, it's an amazing thing that you know, I'd be willing to suffer as long as the other person suffers more. You know, again, getting back to the news, I don't know if you follow the news in the United States, but I think the Senate passed this anti-tobacco bill, which is being hailed that now the FDA can regulate tobacco as a drug. There'll be much more regulation, you know, more stricter requirements about advertising the dangers and so on and so forth, right? More limitations to advertising. And for some strange reason, Philip Morris, which is the largest tobacco producer in the United States, was for it. So you wonder, are they doing tshuva? Not at all. It is a very smart business decision. You see, this limits the ability of competitors to enter the field. Because if you already have a 50% market share, then you're pretty safe. Right? Everyone else is competing for the remaining 50%. All this regulation and limits on advertising will much more adversely affect the smaller upstarts than the large person who has the largest market share. And therefore, it's like the verse says that Shimshon, right, when he was chained to the pillars in Gaza, and he pulled the pillars down and the whole building collapsed, killing himself, he said, Thomas nafshi and Plishtim, that I'm willing to die as long as the Philistines die along with me. So Philip Morris says the same thing, that we're willing to suffer, because we know everyone else will suffer worse. So it's the same thing. In other words, I'll be blind in one eye because I know my competitor will be blind in two eyes. But this is the idea of kinna. Korach is the quintessence of the Baal Kinna. It's an amazing thing. You read the parsha, there's something which should hit you right between the eyes, and it's something which is so amazingly delicious that you, if you notice it, you can't help but be affected by it. Korach comes, and he says like this. He says, these are his first words. Rav lochem, enough, right? Ki chol ha'eda kulam kedoshim, the entire community is holy. U'v'socham Hashem, and God is in their midst. U'madua tisnasu akal Hashem. Why do you elevate yourselves over the congregation of God? In other words, Korach is making an argument that why should there be leaders? We should have an egalitarian society. Everyone is holy. Everyone is learned. Everyone stood at Mount Sinai and heard the word of God. So why do you make yourselves more important than anybody else? So, at first glance, what is Korach advocating?
Democracy.
Well, not democracy. There should be anarchy. There should be no leadership. We should all be equally connected to God without the mediation of leaders. And Moshe says to him, tomorrow morning, tomorrow morning, the Yayda Hashem Es Asher Lo, God will make known who the high priest should be. So right now, Rashi says it's a tumult. Everyone is all heated up. Let's wait till tomorrow. We'll be calmer, and tomorrow morning, God will tell us who the Kohen Gadol should be. And you get the impression that Moshe and Korach are not talking to each other. They're kind of... Korach is saying there should be no king, no Kohen Gadol. There should be no functionaries, because everyone is equally holy. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, okay, tomorrow, you don't like the fact that Aaron is the Kohen Gadol? Tomorrow God will tell us who he wants. What's going on? Moshe Rabbeinu saw right through Korach. Korach was transparent. In other words, Korach is jealous. Korach wants Aaron's position. Maybe wants Moshe's position. He can't have that. So what is so how is Korach dealing with this that he can't have? He says, if I can't be the Kohen Gadol, there should be no Kohen Gadol. And if I can't be the king, there should be no king. But really, what does Korach want? Does Korach believe there should be no king? No, Korach believes there should be a king. I should be the king. I should be the Kohen Gadol. But if I can't be the king, and I can't be the Kohen Gadol, then there should be no king. But that Moshe should be the king, and Aaron should be the Kohen Gadol, and I am a nobody, that's intolerable. That's unacceptable. That I can't take. So therefore, Korach becomes an advocate for an egalitarian society, which he doesn't believe in at all. I remember, it's funny how the insults that you receive in your childhood have this amazing ability to remain with you. When I was in high school, so Baruch Hashem, I was a student, so I was in a more advanced class in religious studies. So I was in high school, I was in grade 10, but I was in a 12th grade class. So, I guess once upon a time they thought I was smart. But anyway, but because I wasn't a senior, so I was like, in a way, I was the low man on the totem pole in terms of executive decision making, right? So I remember there was some class issue. I think it was Purim, and the question was what to buy the Rebbe for Shalach Manas, or something like that. So there were three guys that, in a sense, were making the decision. And the problem was that these three guys were going to make the decision and then make everyone else pay for it. So I expressed my opinion, that's not right. Right? If everyone has to pay, everyone should have a share of the decision. So the guy says to me, you're only saying that because we didn't include you in the small group that's making the decision. Right? In other words, if we would have included you in the little group of 3 or 4 people making the decision, you wouldn't take the position that everyone should have an equal say. Now, it must have made a very deep impact on me, because this is 37 years later, I still remember it.
Forget those guys.
Yeah.
They were calling you Korach.
Yeah, exactly. They were accusing me of being Korach. Maybe it was true. I don't know. I don't remember what my thinking was. But that's really what Korach is saying. Korach doesn't believe there should be no leader. Korach wants to be the leader, right? But if he can't be the leader, so what is the position he takes, right? He says there should be no leader. So Moshe Rabbeinu saw right through it, right? Moshe Rabbeinu understood what was going on, right? So he said, okay, tomorrow, God will decide who the Kohen Gadol will be, whether it's you, whether it's I. We'll see tomorrow, right? But it's an amazing thing. You read the parsha, this is fantastic. And it's more than that, there's a very famous medrash that Rashi quotes. And it says that the last thing in last week's parsha is the mitzvah of tzitzis. And you have tzitzis, you have a white talus, and you have white tzitzis, and you add 1 string of blue, 1 string of tcheres. But otherwise, the other tzitzis in the garment is white. So, what's the juxtaposition of the mitzvah of tzitzis to the story of Korach? So it says that Korach took his 250 men and he wrapped them in talisais, in shawls that were entirely blue. And he comes to Moshe Rabbeinu and says like this. He says, if you're wearing a 4-cornered garment which is entirely blue, do you have to add a blue string to the tzitzis? And Moshe Rabbeinu said, yes, you do. Right? What does the fact that the garment is blue have to do with the tzitzis? Is there a requirement in tzitzis that one of the strings have to be blue? That's blue. Makes no difference if the garment is white, blue, green. It's not the requirement. And Korach said, ha! Imagine that. If you had a garment that was white, all you needed was 1 blue string. And now the whole garment is blue. So you need a blue string? It's a joke. So this is the argument that Korach used talking about Moshe Rabbeinu. And there's another argument he brought. He says you go to a house, so a house has to have a mezuzah. What's in the mezuzah? It's a little scroll with two little sections from the Torah. Shema Yisrael and V'haya im Shemaya. That's the most important part of the mezuzah, not the case. Someone told me a story that there was a person who bought a mezuzah for his friend, and he's putting up the mezuzah, and he took the scroll out and he threw it away, and he put up just a case. So I asked him, what are you doing? He says, I don't need the instructions, I don't want to put up a mezuzah. Anyway, the scroll is the important part. So you have two little chapters in the Torah, and you put them up so that now there's Torah in the house. So the Korach came to us like this. He says, what if you have a bias malay svarim? You have a house that is full of Torah scrolls. Does it need a mezuzah? So Moshe Rabbeinu said, yes, of course it needs a mezuzah. Why should it need a mezuzah? So Korach said, ha! But you have the whole house is filled with Sifrei Torah, and you're telling me that you need a scroll on the doorpost, a mezuzah extra? It makes no sense. So what was Korach's point? So Rabbeinu Bechaya says that was his point. Korach was trying to demonstrate the idea of an egalitarian society. If the whole thing is pchelas, you need an extra string. Or if the whole thing is filled with svarim, you need a mezuzah. So again, symbolically, it shows this idea: everyone is holy. Kol ha'eda kulam kadashim. Everyone is holy. It says we need leaders. We need you to be our. Right? Now, by the way, there are a lot of shuls in the world that thought this way. I grew up in a shul like that. I grew up in a shul where there were a few people that had once learned in yeshiva. We don't need a rabbi for. We don't need a rabbi. What? We know better than a rabbi. So you can imagine what type of shul it was. Where there's no leadership, there's no vision. So everyone thinks they're okay, they're doing the right thing, and there's no one to set them straight. But that's the reality. That Korach made this argument, but it wasn't true. It's not what he thought at all. So what motivated him to make this argument? Because he's the quintessential Baal Kina. He's motivated by jealousy. In other words, it's not that Korach has some ideal. It's not that he believed that Moshe Rabbeinu's leadership was flawed, that he had a better way or a different approach. That couldn't be possible. No, unlikely. But that wasn't the point. It was simply that it should be me and not him. And if Korach would become the leader, how would he run the country? Exactly like Moshe. Nothing would be different. The only difference would be that instead of Moshe, it would be Korach. So he said, it's very hard to convince people, right, to overthrow Moshe Rabbeinu, replace him with me, it's not going to make a difference to anybody. But imagine a person running for office and saying that let's kick out the incumbent and vote me in, and what am I going to do? Everything will be exactly the same. Okay, it will be the same, so leave the guy in there. Right? So therefore, Korach has to come up with some argument that we don't need a leader, etc. But Moshe Rabbeinu saw through that. The Mishna is the Mishna Pirkei Avos, another Mishna, which really illustrates this very beautifully. It's not the Chidush Yarim. Sfasem springs from the Chidush Yarim. Hillel said, "Im ein ani li mi li." If I am not for myself, who will be for me? Uchashani la'atzmi. But if I am for myself, mo ani. Then what am I? So what does this Mishnah mean? So the Chidush Yarim touched like this. He says every person is unique. Every person sees things differently. Every person understands things differently. And a person is meant to make his unique contribution in the world. And that may involve machlokas. Because if you see things uniquely, it may involve fighting to implement your vision against those who see things differently. So you have to know that. You have to be willing to assert yourself. You have to be willing to forward your position and argue for your position and fight for your position. And you can't say, well, I'm not going to get involved. Let someone else do it. Because in ein ani li mi li, because if I am not there to stake out and fight for my position, who is going to be there? It may be that this understanding that I have, only I have, and no one else has. And if I don't fight for it, no one will fight for it. But you have to be very careful, because it's a very fine line between fighting for an idea and fighting for yourself. So the Mishna continues, "Uchsha'ani la'atzmi." But if I'm working for myself, meaning I'm not working for my idea, I'm working for myself, then mo'ani, then what am I? Then I'm nothing. And this is the fine line between the machlokas l'shem shemayim and the machlokas which is not l'shem shemayim. The machlokas l'shem shemayim means I'm fighting for an idea, I'm fighting for an ideal. And that's sofa l'skayim. Because in that good fight, each side arguing vigorously for its belief, a synthesis emerges and the higher truth emerges, a clarification in advance.
But can't a person be fighting for a bad ideal? They're not fighting for themselves. They just have a bad idea, like a social, like communism or something.
No, communism is a good idea, right? In other words, if
it's a bad government.
If the communists and the capitalists would have an honest intellectual debate, probably something would emerge from it which would be better than either one alone. By the way, if you, the present Western democracies, right, are not pure capitalist systems. There's that synthesis has already been achieved. Because if you look at the platform of the United States Communist Party in the 1920s, you'll see what were they advocating. Labor unionism, Social Security, things which have been embraced by the so-called. There certainly has been a synthesis that has emerged. Right? We may have gone too far. We may be going even farther than that, if we aren't careful. When I say we, I'm American, so I'm living vicariously south of the border. So this is something we have to know, that it can't be personal. It can't be personal. It has to be you're fighting for an idea. But I want to leave you with a very, very serious problem. And this is something which really has to be worked out very, very deep. I'll tell you a story. And the story illustrates the idea, and in light of all that we said, the story makes a lot of sense, but it seems to be counter to a statement of Chazal. There was a great Rebbe once, Rabbi Karliner. Rabbi Karliner was a big tzaddik, one of the early Rebbes, a grand Talmud of the Baal Shem. And he once made the following statement. He said, if God would come to me and offer me to switch places with Avraham Avinu, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. Why not? If you have an opportunity to switch places with Avraham Avinu, to receive the eternal bliss in the world to come of Avraham Avinu, you wouldn't do it? Wouldn't do it. So let's think about it for a second. If I would switch places with Avraham Avinu, what would God have out of that? He'd still have one Avraham Avinu and one Aaron Karliner. The only difference would be that instead of him being the Avraham Avinu and me being the Aaron Karliner, he would be the Aaron Karliner and I'd be the Avraham Avinu. But as far as God is concerned, he still have the same thing. So what's the point? Why would you want to do that? You hear the story? Now, let me tell the same story in a modern version. That Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, used to be very, very, very diligent in buying a very beautiful esrog for Sukkot. And this was a mitzvah that was very, very precious to him, and he would go and he'd look, and pay a lot of money. And he was not known for his sound financial management. In other words, when he got a hold of money, if he was paid for a concert or for an appearance, usually the money found its way to the first poor person that he would meet afterward. But whatever money he had, he bought a beautiful esrog. So one year he had a beautiful, beautiful esrog. And a person came to him and said, I really, really would like your esrog. So I'll tell you what. He says, let's trade. I'll give you my esrog, and I'll take your esrog. And he said, sure. Right? And he gave him his beautiful, very, very, very expensive esrog. And he got this esrog, which was maybe barely kosher. Yeah, it was ugly. It was, you know what an ugly esrog looks like. So people asked him, why'd you do that? So what difference does it make? Right? There are two people in the world that are taking the esrog. One is taking a beautiful esrog and he's doing the mitzvah of behidur, and the other is taking an ugly esrog and is doing the mitzvah just in the bare bones way. So what difference does it make whether I'm the person who does it beautifully and that person does it basically, or that person does it beautifully, I do it basically? Either way, it's the same thing. What difference does it make?
One could argue.
Well, this is the story. Now, this story is the same as the first story, right? And this story seems to point to the idea that in pursuit of Torah and mitzvahs, there really should be no personal aspect to it. In other words, there's no priority which is given to my mitzvah over someone else's mitzvah. And you can make the argument as follows. Let's say, for example, let's say I have an esrog, but I have an extra $100. Should I spend that $100 on buying a more beautiful esrog for myself, or should I spend that $100 to buy an esrog for some person who otherwise wouldn't have an esrog? Because maybe you could make an argument that I should do that. The truth is, it could be that you should do that in any case. But the question is, if we take these stories to their logical conclusion, there is no idea of making my mitzvah a priority over someone else's mitzvah. And that seems to be, again, the idea which is implicit in this statement of the Sfasemis and the whole story of Korach, that as we fight for ideas, for ideals, we don't fight that we should be the person doing the mitzvah. Right? If Korach is fighting that he should be the Kohen Gadol instead of Aaron, what difference does it make? Like, why is that worth fighting for? Let me show you the Gemara. Very perplexing Gemara.
But clearly there is a difference because God doesn't make the choice. He thinks Aaron is better qualified to do this, to do exactly the same thing that Korach would do. Clearly, God's decision is there is a difference between the two.
Yeah, I understand. The question is like this. Let's say, so in this story, it's not quite the same thing, right? But what the Sfasemis is taking out of the Mishna in Pirkei Avos, K'shani la'atzmi, Machlokes l'Shem Shemayim, is that it isn't only because in this particular machlokes, God already settled the machlokes. It's because anything you do just for yourself is tainted. But what the Sfasemis is doing is taking it to a step further. He's saying it's not only because God already selected Aaron that Korach is wrong. Korach is wrong is because whenever your motivation is just for yourself, that's improper. Okay? That means even if it wasn't a foregone conclusion. But let's say, for example, there was a community that was looking for a Rav. And people are jockeying for the position. And I'm also putting my name in the hat. And someone asks me, well, what do you think? You think you're any better than the other candidates? I said, no, not any better. Maybe not worse, but not any better. So why are you fighting? Because if I'm just as good, so why should it be him? Let it be me. Right? So some would say, no, that's not a valid intention. In other words, if the other person is not worse, is exactly the same, so why are you in competition? Because you want it to be you? That's wrong. So what do you mean? I'll have the opportunity to do all the mitzvahs. Okay? What difference does it make? Mitzvahs will be done just by somebody else, so what? Therefore it's only for yourself. For yourself, that's possible. That's what they're saying.
This takes a great deal of self-knowledge.
That's certainly true, because you can always delude yourself into thinking I'd be better than him.
People who run for office, tell themselves, I would do a better job than the other guy.
Yeah, you have stories like this. You have stories that are told of certain Rabbonim, that a guest came to their city and showed that he was a magnificent scholar. And the Rabbonim resigned. They said, listen, maybe point there. Now, let me just tell you the Gemara. The Gemara says like this. The Gemara says that, let's say a person put bread in an oven by mistake on Shabbos. Now, if you put bread in an oven and you leave it there long enough to bake, that is a biblical prohibition of baking. You're not allowed to bake on Shabbos. It's one of the 39 forbidden labors. So you put the dough in. If you leave it there for as long as it takes, let's say it takes 15 minutes to bake, so if you leave it for 15 minutes, you will have violated a biblical prohibition. So what should you do? Let's say you put it in by mistake. What should you do? Take it out before the 15 minutes are up, right? If you leave it in, it'll get baked. So that makes sense to take it out. The problem is, in the olden days, the way they baked bread, there was a rabbinic prohibition of removing bread from an oven. Because not like nowadays, you bake it in a pan, just take the pan out. They used to stick the dough onto the wall of the oven. And you have to scrape the dough off. And this involves a certain amount of skill, because if you didn't do it properly, the bread could break. It's called Redias HaPas. Redias HaPas, because it involves a skill, it's not an actual forbidden labor, but it's a rabbinic prohibition. So for example, if you put the bread in before Shabbos, you must remove it also before Shabbos. You can't remove it from the oven, that type of oven, on Shabbos, because scraping it off the wall of the oven is a rabbinic prohibition. So now, you put the dough in on Shabbos. If you leave it 15 minutes, it'll bake. So I have to remove it. Removing it is a rabbinic prohibition. Am I allowed to do that? Talmud says yes. That you're allowed to violate the rabbinic prohibition of removing the bread to save yourself from the biblical prohibition of baking. That's if it's yourself. Now what if someone else put dough in an oven and I want to remove the dough to save him from violating Shabbos? Talmud says no, you don't do that. Because we don't tell a person to sin to benefit somebody else. So I do not do a rabbinic prohibition of removing the dough from the oven to save him from the biblical prohibition of baking. So even though if it was myself, I could do that, I could violate the rabbinic prohibition to save myself from the biblical prohibition, but I can't violate the biblical prohibition, the rabbinic prohibition, to save him from the biblical prohibition. Because I don't sin to benefit somebody else. Now Tosfos asks, this is a contradiction from another Gemara, but this is what the Talmud says. So the question is, But if all that we're saying is true, then what difference does it make? There are two scenarios, two possibilities. In one possibility, a biblical prohibition will be violated. In the other possibility, a rabbinic prohibition will be violated. Which is preferable? A biblical prohibition or a rabbinic prohibition? A rabbinic prohibition. So what difference does it make whether it's the person who put the bread in who's violating the rabbinic prohibition or whether it's somebody else? What difference does it make? Isn't it better that the lesser sin be committed than the more serious sin be committed? No, the Talmud clearly is saying that in some way my first and foremost responsibility is for myself. So therefore there's a big difference. If it's a question of me, yes, it's certainly better for me to do a rabbinic prohibition than a biblical prohibition. But if it's somebody else, that's not my problem. I have to be concerned for myself. And for myself, it's better not to do the rabbinic prohibition than to do the rabbinic prohibition. And what happens to that person is irrelevant. So it seems from here that there is a prioritization which is given to my own mitzvahs as opposed to someone else's mitzvahs. So is this a contradiction to all those wonderful stories which seem to advocate selflessness? Okay, that's a mystery which I'll let you mull over.
Thank you.
An unanswered question.